The roar of the crowd was deafening. The belt, the gold, the money, he saw it all. And he saw what no one else saw. The darkness, the door that wouldn't open, the hand that begged. The greatest man wasn't in the spotlight. He was in the shadows, donating his own time, his own fortune. His name was Cassius Clay. Then Muhammad Ali. His name echoed in every corner of the planet. The greatest, the fastest, the boldest. He had the gold, the red carpet, the admiration of presidents and kings. The whole world saw him as a boxing god. Money arrived in boxes, in suitcases, in contracts that were worth the future of entire cities. But the glory of the ring was only half the story. There was something TV didn't show, something the newspapers could never truly capture. The Muhammad Ali who left the glamour to wander forgotten neighborhoods. The one who got out of his luxury car, traded his silk coat for a simple jacket, and knocked on doors that not even hope dared to visit. It wasn't charity for the cameras. It wasn't a giant check to a distant foundation. It was direct action, money in the right hands, word in the right ear. He saw success as a debt, a silent obligation to those who would never get a ticket to see him fight. Muhammad Ali's story is the story of a giant who knew how to fight. But Cassius's story is the story of a man who used his fortune to fight for those who had no voice. Let's delve into how the greatest athlete in history spent his fortune on what truly mattered, real people. What he did in the shadows is more impactful than any knockout. The highlight of his career wasn't about beating someone, it was about the emptiness afterward. The fight was over, the millions were in the bank, and he was alone in his hotel room, staring at the gold belt on the table. It didn't shine, it felt heavy, a weight that didn't come from the metal, but from an unfulfilled promise. He remembered the look on that boy's mother's face. The boy didn't have the arms to box, he only had hunger. His mother, tears dry on her face, had shown him the hole in the wall of the house, the leak that promised to collapse the roof at the first heavy rain. She wasn't begging, she was asking for dignity, and that hit Ollie harder than any punch Frazier could have. He decided the fortune wouldn't go toward more yachts or cars. It would go toward filling holes, both real and symbolic. The first action was in Louisville, his hometown, the place that saw him born and saw him become something greater. He learned of the case of a family whose house was going to auction for a debt of just $3,000. A paltry sum for someone who had just made $10 million in one night. He sent a discreet lawyer, a man no one would recognize. The order was clear: pay the debt. Let them think it was an administrative error, a bank mistake. Don't reveal the name. The lawyer hesitated. He said the family would never believe him. There, on the phone, his voice deep and calm, he replied, "They don't need to believe me. They need to believe that justice exists. That's what they need to sleep tonight." The internal conflict was brutal. How could the most famous man in the world act anonymously? It was a struggle against his ego. He, who adored the audience, was demanding silence. It was harder to remain silent than to boast on the podium. He had to fight the temptation of immediate gratification through public recognition. In Chicago, I heard about a group of young people trying to set up a boxing and martial arts gym to keep kids out of gangs. They didn't have money for rent, much less equipment. Ollie didn't send a charity check. He showed up, dressed simply. He entered the abandoned place. The boys looked at him in disbelief. The champion, he didn't give a speech. He looked at the rotting ceiling, the cracked cement floor. He picked up a broom and began sweeping. One of the boys, thin and suspicious, asked, "What are you doing, champ? This is work for us." There he stopped, looked at the boy, and the smile faded. His expression was one of pure seriousness. "I'm investing," he said, his voice low, almost secretive. "I'm investing in your idea that strength lies in what you build, not in what you destroy. Do you think this broom is heavier than a world title? It's not. The weight is the same. Responsibility." He didn't just pay the first year's rent and renovate the place. He bought books, tables, and chairs. He demanded that the gym have a study room. He wanted boxers, but he wanted even more. He wanted men of thought. Fortune was a tool to change the script of entire lives. He didn't just give them fish. He revamped the entire sea so they could learn to fish, with new books and gloves. That weight of the belt, which felt like the loneliness of fame, was actually the weight of his new mission. The weight of honor. He was no longer just the fighter. He was the catalyst. Muhammad Ali's greatest fight wasn't broadcast. It was the fight to restore light to the eyes of those who only knew the shadows. Fame opened doors to grand palaces, but he used it to enter small hells. It wasn't about writing a check and leaving. It was personal. Muhammad Ali demanded human contact with the misery his fortune could alleviate. He saw money as a tool for connection, not separation. he heard about a man, a war veteran who had lost everything in a fire, living in an old van in Detroit. The man didn't ask for help. He tried, with broken dignity, to sell trinkets on the street. Ollie went to him. He didn't take any bodyguards. He took only a coat and a hot coffee, on a cold morning. He sat on the floor next to the man. The veteran, not recognizing him at first, began to tell the story of how he lost his home. He spoke of the shame of being homeless. He spoke of the fear of being forgotten. Ollie simply listened, his brow furrowed. He didn't interrupt with promises. He let the man unburden himself of all his pain. When the veteran finished, a heavy silence fell. Ollie took out his wallet. There wasn't a wad of bills there. There was a sealed envelope. He handed it over. "This is a loan," Ollie said. "To start over. Don't give me back the money. Give me back the faith. Use this to lift someone else up when you can." Inside the envelope was enough money to buy a modest house. The intensity of the act was this: he never gave. He invested in people's faith. His greatest struggle was against cynicism, the feeling that no one cares. His staff often tried to protect him, arguing that he needed distance from the chaos. He laughed. He said the chaos was the real ring. Once, in Los Angeles, he used a significant amount of money to set up a small fund to pay gas and electricity bills for families whose services were cut off during the winter. It was a harsh winter. The bureaucracy was slow. He was fast. He couldn't simply pay for everything. He would have to spend his entire fortune in a month. The dilemma was choosing who to help. The criteria were always urgency and decency. He trusted his instincts. He dressed like a driver, entered communities, and asked around. People didn't suspect anything. The champion walked among them like a kindly ghost. The pressure was immense. The fear of being deceived, of being exploited, the fear of failing the people he chose. But he faced this risk like a knockout punch. It was part of the game. He never stopped talking about himself in the ring. But on the street, he only talked about others. His wealth didn't just give him purchasing power, it gave him listening power. He who can lift the world is he who first kneels down to listen to what the world has to say. If you feel the power of this story of compassion and the fight against oblivion, don't let this video be just another one. Leave your like to show that anonymous kindness has value. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the rest of this intense journey. And tell me in the comments, what's the most unexpected act of kindness you've ever seen? Your story matters too. Now, let's continue. And to help us continue uncovering these real stories and improving the quality of our content, consider purchasing our ebook. You'll find the direct link in the first link in the description. Your support makes all the difference. Ollie's money wasn't just for fixing broken roofs and paying electricity bills. It was for mending broken souls. This mission led him into truly dangerous situations, into back alleys and lanes where his fame didn't buy safety, only unwanted attention or, worse, hostility. He was aware of the danger, but he accepted each step as a moral tax imposed by his wealth and success. Malcolm's story is the most vivid proof of the intensity of this mission. Malcolm was a young man on fire, trapped in a cycle of anger and violence, fresh out of prison and with absolutely no prospects other than returning. The community had written him off as a lost cause, but Ollie didn't. He saw the raw power, the misdirected energy. He saw the future the boy was throwing away. There he learned of the young man's final act of desperation. In a fit of blind rage, Malcolm had broken his mother's only possession of emotional value, a small, old sewing machine. It wasn't a major crime, but it was the collapse of a family, the destruction of his mother's only means of earning money. There he tracked the young man, driving alone to a neighborhood of dim light and intense fear. He entered the cramped apartment. The strong smell of mold, rotten food, and pure despair hung in the air. Malcolm stared at him. His eyes were filled with surprise, with defensive hatred. The champion, in his home, in this alley broke the silence without giving time for shock. "Do you know who I am?" Ollie asked, his voice deep and without a trace of humor. Malcolm swallowed, his throat dry. "Everyone knows. You know what I do." Ollie continued, stepping closer. "I throw punches and take them. It's my job. But the hardest punch you ever throw isn't in the ring. It's the one you throw at the people who love you, the people who believe in you. You broke the machine. You broke its hope, Malcolm." The conversation wasn't a celebrity sermon. It was a confrontation on equal terms, a brutal reckoning. Ollie used his aura not to physically intimidate, but to paralyze the young man with the disarming truth. He didn't ask about the past crime, about the prison. He asked about the future. Then he opened the suitcase he was carrying. There were no wads of cash visible. There were work tools, pliers, screwdrivers, engine parts. Ali said he knew of a trusted mechanic who needed a helper. Someone strong enough to lift a heavy engine with enough rage to turn that energy into work. He, Ollie, would invest the money needed to pay for Malcolm's first few months of training, to give him a chance to learn a trade that required hands. Not rage, but the condition was harsh, humiliating, and absolutely real. Malcolm would have to go with Ollie, right then and there, to buy his mother a new sewing machine. Not an expensive or luxurious gift, but a simple, functional one, and he would have to sew his first garment under her supervision. The request was an act of reparation worth more than any amount. The young man, his fury crushed by the unexpected decency, did not cry. He trembled. His resistance dissolved into a painful recognition of his failure. He accepted the condition, the imposed redemption. Ollie didn't buy Malcolm with money. He bought time. Time for the young man to rethink who he was and who he could become. Ollie's money was merely the lubricant that kept the wheels of opportunity turning in lives that were rusting. His greatest gift wasn't the check, it was his presence. His unshakable belief that everyone deserves a second chance, even the boy who seemed to have thrown away every chance. HOOK. The greatest victory is not when you knock out your opponent, but when you lift up the one life knocked down with your own hands. The weight of Ollie's hands was a legend known in every corner of the world, but the weight of the secrets he carried in his heart was far greater. His greatest and most difficult effort was not to maintain the discretion of those he helped, but to maintain his own, to fight the ego's natural temptation to claim credit. There was a constant risk in being the anonymous champion. Kindness, when coupled with wealth, attracted opportunists like a magnet, people who saw generosity not as a strength, but as the greatest of weaknesses. The coup came in Phoenix. Ali had decided to invest a large sum in building a vital community center for young people in a disadvantaged neighborhood. It was a significant amount. He didn't buy the land or the building outright. He gave the funds to the community leadership to do it themselves, so they would feel a sense of ownership, responsibility, and achievement. He wanted the victory to be theirs, not his, but the money, the future, the dream ... vanished. The community leader, a man he had selected and trusted based solely on the decency he sensed in his handshake, fled with most of the funds. The foundation was never laid. The center was never built. The dream of hundreds of young people collapsed like a house of cards. That the news didn't make the headlines that adored him, but it reached Ali's ears with the brute force of a blow to the liver. The betrayal hurt more than any defeat in Manila or Kinshasa. He didn't feel the cold fury of a fighter robbed. He felt the deep, silent pain of the young men left without their refuge, without their only hope for the future. The moral dilemma was excruciating. Publicly denounce the thief, expose the error, and tarnish his reputation as a good judge of character, or swallow the massive loss and try to repair the damage in secret. He chose silence. Ollie knew that if he took the case to court, the scandal of betrayal would destroy the moral fabric and trust of the entire community. People would stop trusting their own leaders. Fear and cynicism would win, and that was a far worse loss, far greater than the financial loss. He could never allow cynicism to win. He called his trusted lawyer. The order came from a voice that brooked no questioning. Start over. He contributed an even larger sum from his own pocket, enough to cover the shortfall and finish the center from scratch. This time he put in place a discreet monitoring team to ensure the project was completed, but he himself stayed away. He wasn't looking for applause. He wasn't looking for credit. He was looking only for a complete solution. That center needed to exist. The lesson Ollie learned from this brutal betrayal was that money alone can't buy anyone's trust, but it can buy the chance to rebuild it when it's broken. He continued to give, but the scar of the blow transformed him. He became more selective, more cautious. A wounded man who persisted but never stopped believing in good. His staff, frustrated with the lack of recognition, asked, "Why not let them know what you do? Your story would inspire millions." There he responded with a calmness that disarmed any argument. A wisdom that came from the streets, not from books. Inspiration doesn't need my name. It needs action. When they see the center ready, when the light comes on and the door opens, without knowing who paid for it, they believe that the change came from within themselves. That is stronger than any fame I've ever had. The price of silence was high, the loneliness of sacrifice, the pain of betrayal endured in secret, but he paid it, because he knew that anonymity was the only guarantee that the help was genuine, and the restored faith, lasting. Hook. The true champion is not the one who gets up after falling, but the one who pays the price of anonymity to ensure that the other does not fall again. The years passed relentlessly. Ollie's body betrayed the champion publicly and painfully. The stiffness, the tremors, the hoarse, low voice. Parkinson's had robbed him of his most powerful weapon outside the ring, his eloquence. But ironically, the disease robbed him of his voice, but not his ability to feel and act. On the contrary, it intensified his silent urgency. He never stopped knocking on doors. Now, his steps were slow, his head bowed, but his heart was still on fire. In the eyes of the world, he was a fragile legend. To those he helped, he was a guardian angel who moved with difficulty. The greatest of all heavyweights. The man who promised to float like a butterfly and sting like a bee, now moved with the heavy slowness of illness. But his hands, the same hands that felled Sonny Liston and George Foreman, that rose in triumph with the belt, were now the hands that silently lifted the fallen. They didn't strike, they touched. He continued to fund, tirelessly, small schools in marginalized neighborhoods that governments had forgotten. He paid for complex and expensive medical treatments for those who had been abandoned by luck and the health system had discarded. He bought truckloads of food and fuel for families facing the harsh winter, ensuring the lights wouldn't go out and the cold wouldn't kill. The millions in his account dwindled, but his thirst to make a difference never waned. He didn't measure his life by the trophies and belts he won, but by the number of lives he touched anonymously. He was spending his legacy before he even left, but many only discovered the true extent of his charitable actions after he was gone. It was the great secret revealed in his absence. Letters, testimonies, and stories began to emerge in overwhelming numbers. There were accounts of people saved by help that came from nowhere, by rent paid by an anonymous donor, by a door that opened when all seemed lost. These people, upon learning that this kindly ghost was Muhammad Ali, wept not for the public figure, but for the depth of humanity he hid so well from his own ego. The man who boasted with the biggest and most colorful of voices, the master of trash talk and built his most profound legacy in absolute silence. The irony was cruel, because of the illness that silenced him, and beautiful, because of the purpose that kept him active when he finally passed. The memory that remained was not just that of an unbeatable boxer with a gigantic ego. He left a trail of dignity in forgotten neighborhoods, the warmth of a breath of hope in desperate homes, a genuine chance for young people the system had condemned. He didn't seek to be a saint on earth. He sought to be a complete man, using his strength and wealth for a purpose greater than personal glory. The true end of his journey wasn't the final round in the ring. It was the final act of giving, the last hand extended in the dark, the last whisper of help when the world awaited the empty roar of celebrity. Muhammad Ali's life teaches us a definitive lesson. True fortune lies not in what you accumulate, but in what you share, and that the greatest of champions, the strongest, is the one who uses his strength and privilege to kneel not to pray or be crowned but to lift others. May his journey be not only an incredible sports story, but a warning and a model for us all. The greatest wealth lies in the ability to use what you have to make someone else's life a little lighter, a little more dignified. He was Muhammad Ali, and he was so much more than that. He was living proof that greatness resides in humanity, and that a champion can fight not just to defeat an opponent, but to serve humanity.